Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. So today I am joined by the amazing team of Matt Peppler and Brian Schoof, also known as the Post Credits Podcast. How you doing today, gentlemen?
I'm
Good.
great.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. This is
it's
awesome.
an honor. Yeah, I was lucky enough to be a guest with my wife on the Post Credits Podcast. And now I've worked with Matt on one of our live episodes, and now Brian being able to have you on Sledgehammer Horror. This is so intense for me. I'm so excited to work with you guys again. But before we get into the reason why they're here, I do want to explain a little bit about these guys. Matt is an illustrator and graphic designer, and after he made his first artist appearance at Walker Stalker Con in Chicago, which is amazing as it is, he was hooked. So is writing and illustrating, is that something you've done your whole life, Matt, or is it something that later on you kind of gravitated to?
Illustration is something that I started at a young age, really young. And that was something that my parents fostered. They did it with both my sister and I. Whatever we had any interest in, that's something that they fostered. So very young age, but then I didn't know I was going to go for a career until much later when I was in college. So it just turns out that like the people I was around and in high school were really talented. And I was like kind of selling myself short a little bit. So.
Well, I'm glad that you kind of sold yourself short a little bit, because now you're here. So every action has a reaction. It all worked out for the best. Now a little bit about Brian. He's an award-winning filmmaker, and his work has been seen on local and national cable television. Also the founder of Bombastic Entertainment and co-host of the Post Credits Podcast with Matt. So how did you actually start to get into filmmaking, Brian?
Well, you know how, I don't know, maybe other people didn't do this. Like whenever you have a school project and they kind of give you like a loose topic, I would always look for ways to turn that into whatever I wanted to be doing. So my art teacher in middle school gave us a project where, okay, you have to pick an artist and do something using similar means and media. And they went in alphabetical order. And because my last name starts with S, like I was pretty much screwed by that point, because like all the low hanging fruit, like your Vincent Van Gogh is gone, your MC Escher, people picked that, oh, Crazy Stairs, got to do something like that. Okay, well, who's an artist that I actually care about at this point? So I was like, well, do you consider Steven Spielberg an artist? And she thought about it, and she's like, well, yeah, I guess so. Like, okay, great, I want to make a movie. And well, can you do that? Like, you guys have a video camera? And we did, because it was the 90s, and like now where everyone has their cell phone and a video editing capture device, complete package right in their pockets. So it's a little bit harder, but I mean, that was basically it. And you know, I saw a lot of crossover with comic books, because I'm kind of a big comic book freak, and realizing that your canvas is your frame, it was very similar to the way that they tell stories. It's like, well, let's do this, but with people. So hopefully that answered your question, and just kind of snowballed from there.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, because I love the fact that it started at a young age, and at a young age, you knew that that's what you wanted to do. So now you have a graphic designer, illustrator, and a filmmaker coming together to work on a podcast.
Right.
So what can you tell us a little bit about the Post Credits Podcast? How did this get started, Matt?
It was actually a COVID-19 project. I was out of work indefinitely. I was a senior graphic designer at a local marketing firm. And then Brian, what was the deal? Like, it was like COVID restrictions kind of shut down where you were working, but you were out of work as well for a little bit, right?
Yeah, well, we knew we were going back. It was just that question of like, well, how long is this going to last for? And like, I don't know, whatever, I'm on paid vacation right now. And we had done a couple like proto casts in the past. Is it like, I helped you at some of your shows, and we were thinking about like ways, and I don't know, nothing ever clicked. And then you kind of had the idea of doing a movie show. It's like, well, yeah, let's do that. Sure. Yeah, why not? There are enough people doing that. So let's do more.
Right. But also it's like, that's something that like we're both passionate about. Like,
Sure.
I love movies as much as you do. It's just interesting that we both took different paths kind of surrounding movies, you know? Mm-hmm. So I think with like both of our how we normally talk about these things, I think lends itself well to how leaping into podcasts, because my whole goal was to just try as much to record like our authentic conversations about movies and that sort of thing. And
Right.
then we didn't like, oh, we shouldn't do tangents. We shouldn't like meander through an episode. So we, it's very like free flowing. And sometimes we'll have episodes where like we're very on point and talking about the movie. And then other episodes where it's like, well, we're kind of going all through all these different paths, So I think just those two things like lended itself really well to us having a good podcast together. And Brian's much more eloquent than I am, so my takes can be a little spicy at times, and he can justify why things are the way that they are. I'm just like, no, I don't. This is horrible. This is not good.
Well, and what I love about it is when on the podcast, it was very, like you said, free flowing. There wasn't this hard, like, this is how we're doing it. This is what you got to do. It was just like, hey, you're going to come on. We're going to have fun. We're going to talk about this film, maybe bleep out a couple things and just have a good ass time. So that's what I loved about it. There was no follow the format. It was let's do it and let's have a great time. So before we get into the reason why we're here, one last question. Brian, how many episodes have you guys had of the podcast now?
Well, tomorrow we're going to record number 100, so we're creeping up right there. We were joking the other day that this is like episode 100.5, or it's like a like a radio station. So,
I mean, the reason I asked that is because if you guys want to go and do a deep dive, you should. And the links are very easy to find because they're right down here in the description. So not only is the podcast down here, but both of these gentlemen's social media links and the podcast social media links are all down here in the description. So make sure you're giving a click down here. Make sure you're following the podcast, following the guys on social media. You can stay up to date on everything they're up to. So for you to start a podcast and talk about horror movies on the podcast, but I want to be clear, the podcast is not just horror movies, correct?
That's right. Yeah, we do a wide variety of things, but we do tend to go in spurts of like horror movies for a few weeks at a time.
Yeah, it's just kind of whatever we tend to gravitate towards at that moment. And yeah, we both like horror movies, and that's kind of how we became friends, like way back in the day. So
yeah, I remember that, man. I remember that.
There are definitely there's definitely moments where it's like, hey, we're hitting horror pretty hard right now. Let's dial it back for a couple episodes. Just
right.
Well, and that's what I love about the podcast is you guys don't stick yourself to one thing, but in order to talk about horror on a podcast, horror had to start for you somewhere. So I want to go back to the past here for a little bit. Let's start with you first this time, Brian. Let's talk about the first horror movie you watched. And Brian, your first horror movie was?
I really had to rack my brain over this because there were a couple different milestones in there. And I don't think I even knew that they were called horror movies when I saw the first one. So just going back through, I think it was probably Poltergeist, because we went to, you're wearing the shirt there. That's beautiful.
Yes, sir. Well, I try to decorate accordingly. So that's, we got another gentleman back here we'll be talking about here in a little bit, but so Poltergeist was your first.
Yeah, we went to a drive-in and they had a double feature, and it was Gremlins and Poltergeist. And I don't think my friend's parents thought that we would be awake by the time they got to Poltergeist, because like Gremlins is like horror comedy, but it's more of a comedy. You don't really think of that as a horror movie. And Poltergeist, we're playing it, and it's like, they got the radio on in the car and you're hearing it and you're kind of like pretending to be asleep, but not really, because you're just sort of transfixed by it. Kids are getting kidnapped in other dimensions by evil clowns, guys clawing his face off and sink. And that was the moment that really stuck with me, because I think it's a phenomenon I've only heard described as kinder trauma, where like you're young, but you're seeing something that like it's a very clear milestone in the end of your childhood, because like the idea that we had a skeleton inside of us just didn't occur to 6 or 7 year old Brian.
Right.
And it's like you see yourself in the mirror and you're like, and then you look at your head, like, we look like this inside. And I can trace a couple other moments like that where you just had that like, loss of innocence. That
Mm-hmm.
we look
For
like
sure.
that. Wait, what? And then you just didn't look at things the same way. Because like Predator was one of the other ones that I thought might have been a first one, but that's science fiction. It's horror adjacent. It's not really a horror movie. But I remember seeing like these clouds of blood shoot out of people during the action scenes, and again, it's that whole thing of like, we have that inside, like and up until the time you had only seen, or I'd only seen like the A-Team, GI Joe, where they're shooting lasers, but there's no real consequence to the violence. So like that was definitely like a we have this inside of us kind of thing.
And Poltergeist definitely doesn't end with a "the more you know" star.
Right. Yeah. Right. Definitely doesn't.
I do want to go on record real quick as saying I do totally believe that Predator is a horror movie. I just wanted to throw that out there real quick. I do in my heart totally believe it's a slasher. He wears a mask. He's going after these people and he won't stop until he gets them all. I've always believed it. That's the great thing about horror, though. We
You should have asked him, Brian. I was like, it's not a horror movie. I don't think it is.
Yeah, I still think it's horror adjacent because of the themes. I think you could use a lot of the same arguments for Terminator, because that's absolutely a slasher movie.
Yeah.
In a lot of the same ways, but
and that's a whole conversation for another day. We'll catch up on that one another time. We'll do a retrospective on Predator someday, I promise. But Matt, I want to jump to you real quick. Your first horror movie was
Friday the 13th. I'm pretty sure it's similar to Brian, where it's like, oh man, this was so long ago. Like horror has been so ingrained in like my whole life, where it's like, how do I remember that far back? But I remember my sister, like I remember the impression my sister and I had after watching it, because we were just like, what? So I think that has to be the first one. And I vividly remember like the title sequence for Friday the 13th. So I'm guessing that would have to be it, with that like profound of a memory. But at the same time, I'm still kind of in limbo.
The first one. The
very first Friday the 13th. Yeah. Yeah. And then
which I've gone on record, and I want to say this again. They should remake that movie with Kathy Bates as Mrs. Voorhees. I've gone on record saying it. I'm going to keep saying it until I speak it into existence. I need a Friday the 13th with Kathy Bates as Mrs. Voorhees. I just think that'd be the coolest shit ever.
Well, she's psycho enough where, it's like, it's not a leap that she would give birth to someone like Jason Voorhees, you know what I mean? So, what is that? What does that look? What is that like?
I was just trying to envision, I'm not debating that. I was just trying to envision that, if she gets too old to run around as Pamela Voorhees, that we have the technology that someone can deep fake this into existence.
Sure. Or maybe it's like an Amigo, in Camp Crystal Lake, one of those little scooters.
All we need is just splice in the scene of her at the end of The Water Boy running and spearing the dad, and just splice that in the woods. It'll work for her. No one will know the difference.
Day for night, dad, and it all hangs together.
Yeah. So, Brent, I want to bounce back to you here for a second. Poltergeist will go down in history, I believe, as one of the absolute best, and I mean absolute best, PG horror movies of all time. Mm-hmm. Do you remember which scene it was out of all the ones in that film that affected you the most?
Yeah, I think it was the guy clawing his face off, and it was really just, like I say, not like coming from a point where, you didn't understand that we had a skeleton in our body, and coming from, not seeing any consequences to violence. Because again, to go back to the A-Team, there were bullets shooting in that, but people kind of like fell out of their cars and helped each other out. And then the car exploded a minute later. Nobody ever really got hurt. And it was the same thing with GI Joe. And I was thinking about that, where, they're shooting lasers like crazy everywhere. And if you think about it, it's like, oh yeah, all the vehicles had these open canopies, so they can just tilt over and everyone can just fall to safety. So nobody really gets hurt, even though World War III is going on,
Well, that's a scene like you said that, and it comes out of nowhere at this point. He's sitting there eating a chicken wing, looks down and sees the maggots, and the next thing you know, he's ripping his own face off. So I definitely understand where you're coming from with that. Matt, so I want to bounce to Friday the 13th real quick. Remember, we are talking about the original, the OG.
Yes. Yep.
What would you say your favorite scene? Not the one that affected you the most, but what would you say your favorite scene from the original Friday was?
Oh man, I don't know. Like, I would have to say, like, I would go off like how creative the kills were, where, and then it's like specifically like Kevin Bacon getting the arrowhead through the neck was particularly crazy. Stuff like that just seemed like, even then, seemed like really crazy. And yeah, that had like a huge like impact. And then like jumping off point for the rest of horror. But that's not the scene that affected me the most. But I just remember that equally, I think. So
now I got to know, which scene was it that affected you the most?
Oh, well, it was the ending. I think for anyone that jumped into horror and this was like the first time, like having that ending where it's like this really nice lady is this massive killer, kind of, I think we take for granted that type of thing now. But then it just seemed like it was so out of left field. It was like one of those early twist endings that I had seen, so that had like a big effect on me, where it's like, oh, nothing's safe, even if you think someone's really nice or couldn't do certain things, they're completely capable. So that had a huge effect. Like, that's very memorable to me.
Yeah, and
even Victor Miller said, like, when he wrote this, he was writing Halloween meets Psycho, and I feel like that's really what he did, and he perfected it with that.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I think it works a lot, because I know it took audiences sideways at a time, because Betsy Palmer was on sitcoms and kind of known as this nice lady, but we didn't really grow up with those shows. So when we see it, and she's still very disarming, and it comes across in all the same ways. So,
and it's one of those things where it's unfortunate that she got to the point where she really hated it, but she was she's one of the OG killers, man. Like, we always think of Friday the 13th, we think Jason, but Pamela was evil in her own right. Even though we have a lot of off-screen and below-screen kills, I love the first Friday the 13th. I don't think it's aged as well. Maybe if I turned it on now, I'm like, okay, but I still love the character, and I love the franchise has done as a whole. Now, a question I've been asking recently, I'm going to give this one to you, Brian. It's, would you like to see your first horror movie remade? Now, obviously, they've already done a remake of Poltergeist. So have you seen the Poltergeist remake? And if so, what were your feelings on that?
Nope, didn't watch it. I'm sorry, that's a short question. I think I saw the end of it, not the whole end, but like a part of it, going over to someone's house, and like, oh yeah, no one cares about this. Like, the original is just so much better. Like, it ages very well.
It does. Especially when that house implodes on itself and just vanishes.
That looks so cool.
Still looks awesome.
Yeah, that looks so cool. The whole scene with the pool where the skeletons are popping up is great. It's still chilling when Craig T. Nelson has the realization that you moved the you didn't move the bodies, you moved the tombstones, and that's such a great twist there. Now I didn't see the remake of that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's one you really have to. The thing for me is just like, there's nothing memorable about the remake. Like,
no,
it took what the original did and drug it down a little bit. And that's nothing against the actors or anything like that. You just couldn't live up to what they did. They didn't write anything original into the script. So that's how I feel about that one. So Matt,
well, just to hang our hat on that a little bit, I think Poltergeist is actually kind of a remake of Amityville Horror, only in the sense that nobody got their story straight. There's things in the book that people say that happened, and then they have their event that they were on talk shows for, where the family was saying this is what happened, and then you have all these different confluence of events. And I feel like it's not a remake, in that like that movie is only a couple years old, but it's like really smart people took all of that, put it together into one story and did it at the Hollywood level to the nines. That's why I say it's kind of like a remake, but not really.
Well, yeah, and I loved obviously I love Toby Hooper, I love Steven Spielberg. And I think that if you put me in a room and you're like, hey, you need to choose Poltergeist or Amityville, 100 out of 100 times I'm taking Poltergeist. That's just I am. Now if we're talking remakes, I take the Amityville remake over the Poltergeist one, but yeah, I just think the Poltergeist, especially for being a PG, obviously if they had the PG-13 rating back then, I think Poltergeist would have been hit with the PG-13. But for this to be a PG movie, you know, I think the first time this and Tourist Trap both, the first time I seen these movies was at like 2 p.m. on Fox 36 Toledo. You know, it was just played on network TV and it scared the dog shit out of me. Like, how is this allowed to be played on TV? This is scary.
I would agree. That's kind of crazy that it's PG, you know?
Well, and this is one of the movies, I think this and Temple of Doom, Spielberg personally lobbied the MPAA for the creation of the PG-13 rating. It's like, this is really scary. I don't know how comfortable I am with this. And maybe it was because he was getting a little soft and having a family and becoming a father at that point. I don't know, but you know, there's certainly some dark stuff in Temple of Doom as well.
So no, and I love Spielberg. You know, everything from Poltergeist to Jaws to Jurassic Park. You know,
what about AI? How about that one?
Everything from Poltergeist to Jurassic Park to Jaws.
Just cut it off at Saving Private Ryan.
So.
Sorry.
So I do real quick, guys. Brian, you're going to be a little lucky here because it's Matt's turn. So you're going to have a second to think on it. Matt, not so much. We talked about your first horror movie, gentlemen, and what that means to you. But now I want to throw you a little bit of a curveball. My little buddy Ghostface here has a question for you. And obviously he's going to ask it to Matt first. What's your favorite scary movie, Matt? What is your favorite horror movie of all time?
The Thing. Look at the logo. Yeah, The Thing is 100%. It's not just my favorite horror movie, it's my favorite movie. I put it on a pedestal above everything else.
See, and I knew that, but amazing. I gotta ask, we've had this conversation before. I know how much that movie means to you, and rightfully so. Well, one of the best movies, we talked about remakes a minute ago, one of the best remakes of all time. Like, you talk about taking an idea and making it your own. That's the perfect example right there on how to do that.
Yeah, I was actually in a Horror Dads Discord discussion, and someone said like, oh, it's like what they were talking about a different movie. And I was like, oh, it's one of the best remakes ever. I was like, and it wasn't The Thing. And I was like, I gotta defend this because that can't be the case because there's a glaring example of something else. That's much more important. So
I respect it. I love John Carpenter. I love I think The Thing has one of the most underrated scores of all time as well. So
yes.
And
it's also cool that like sorry to interrupt you. It's cool that like Hateful Eight has part of that score in it. You know, that's like a really awesome thing when that's a movie about not being able to trust anybody. And they're like, yeah, we're just going to use music from The Thing. That's a movie about not being able to trust anybody, you know? So I thought
can we talk about also real quick
Snowbound.
how The Thing has one of the most ambiguous endings? Like,
it does.
Is he turned? Does. You know, is he a monster?
Childs is, Childs is.
You see his breath.
Right. And well, Dean Kunde, the cinematographer, he has talked about like who is the thing or who isn't, and he has revealed that there's like a giveaway to who is it, you know, and there's these little pin lights on all of the eyeballs that the thing has infected. So if you go through the movie and you see these two little, they're very tiny, but they're white dots, like kind of near the iris, then they're infected by the thing. So Childs has them at the end of the movie. Yeah.
Damn. I didn't know that. I'm going to rewatch that tonight now just to check it out. So before Ghostface goes back into his box, I'm trying to keep him down, but what's your favorite scary movie, Brian? So he needs to know from you, Brian, what's your favorite horror movie?
Yeah, I think that's going to have to be Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors.
Because of the soundtrack, right?
Yeah. Because
welcome to prime time.
Yeah, that was really cutting edge for the time, you know, and yeah, that line just kind of flowed through Robert Englund. And, you know, that was one of those moments of like the character informing him, you know, and there's a moment like that in part 2 with You're All My Children Now. Like that wasn't in the script. He just did that in the moment. Not that that's nearly as good as Dream Warriors, but yeah, I think it's really relatable. Just the whole dichotomy of the Elm Street movies where there's this, you know, as a teenager and adolescent, you feel like, oh, the parents just don't get it. Nobody's felt pain like I do, whatever. You know, that's all part of growing up. And the idea that the kids see something that the adults are just kind of hand waving away. I think we've all had that experience to some level or another. Luckily, it wasn't a supernatural murderer killing us in our dreams. Hopefully, for most people, it wasn't that extreme. But yeah, no, I think it's really cool and crazy and imaginative and just a wonderful movie.
A river long enough contains no bend, so who knows where we might go eventually. But I think that you're right. Welcome to prime time, bitch. I think that's the best line in the whole film. You know, welcome to prime time, bitch. I think that that's something as a child I said so many times. Like if I was playing video games, like you had a little 10-year-old Kenny with his curly headed mullet, and I'd be at the end boss, like getting the Shao Kahn. I'd be, welcome to prime time, bitch. Like that was me, man. Like that was my shit, dude. Like, so
that's actually how. Sorry to interrupt again. No, that's please. Actually how Robert Englund signed my Freddy Krueger poster. Was welcome to primetime, bitch. So
I totally thought you were gonna be like, that's totally what I said to Brian the first time I met him. Welcome to primetime, bitch. I think that's got to be like, that's got to be the thing you do before you have sexual relations with someone from now on. Welcome to primetime, bitch.
Yeah, there's cameras. There's cameras everywhere.
I do want to say I've been married to the same woman for 17 years. And I think the reason why is because I've never once to her said, welcome to primetime, bitch, before being intimate. Okay. Maybe, I don't know. That could have something to do with it. So
I will keep that in mind.
Yeah.
You know, later.
Don't let me
at some point.
Yeah, because you do that. Congratulations. Now you're single. Bam.
Right. That is how to end a 17-year marriage. Thanks, Robert. So before I let you guys go, I do want to go back to your first horror films. This time, Brian, I'll start with you. I want to go back to Poltergeist. And what we're going to do is we're going to rank this on a skull count. Now, what we're doing, we're not judging it on production, score, acting, direction, none of the above. We're not being critics. What we're doing here is we're strictly ranking this movie on how much it affected you on first viewing. So, Brian, 0 skulls being not effective, 5 being extremely effective. You can use half and quarter skulls anywhere in the middle. What would your ranking of Poltergeist be?
I think I'd give it 4 skulls.
4?
Fair rating. Very fair rating.
Yeah.
As a kid?
Yeah, as a kid. Yeah, because there were other movies that affected me as much, but it was like in that progression because again, you know, I go back to the, okay, you know, kids are getting kidnapped into other worlds by evil clowns, which look, you know, Sid Haig has this line, and I think it's The Devil's Rejects, where people always say that they hate clowns, but no one can give you a reason, right? You remember that line?
No.
I'll give you a great reason. It's because the face paint creates an unnatural separation, right? So you don't trust them because you like there's this primal thing you can't tell if they're lying to you or not. Because the whole thing is that they're painted up to look happier and crazier than they are. And as somebody who always hated clowns, and people often mistake that as, oh, you're afraid of clowns. No. I hate them. There's a big difference. So, okay, that might have been where that started right there. But it goes back to the ripping the face off and the peeling the layers away and the idea that there's just more to us as creatures than, you know, child Brian ever imagined. And then I got to see that evolve in other movies. You know, again, we'll bring it back to Predator just because that's another example of, okay, you didn't just have a face getting clawed off, you had entire bodies hanging from trees, skinned alive. And it's like even worse somehow. So that's why I would give it 4, because it kind of opened that door, and it was absolutely, you got a loss of innocence. You don't look at things the same way, but there were other things that evolved that in ways that very much the same and just as impactful.
I just didn't
That
know
makes
like
perfect sense.
very young Brian could be so cynical about movie making. 4 out of 10. The 60% of this movie
it was
is
4
just
out of
dreadful.
5.
Yeah,
It was
4 out of 5.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought it was 4 out of 10.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. My apologies.
On a Rotten
my
Tomato
apologies.
meter, like that's
Yeah.
rotten. Like that doesn't even count, man. That doesn't
I
rank.
retract my statement.
Okay.
So what about you, Matt? 0 being the worst, 5 being the most effective.
Oh,
What
it
would
was
you
like
Friday the 13th?
It was 5 for sure because I can't remember. It's so weird to look at it like this, but I can't remember like movies before that, right? Like, so it's like that first time when you see something like really terrifying. Like for me, it's like I'll always remember seeing Exorcist or Alien for the first time, where you're just like, oh my god, But it's the same way with Friday the 13th. I feel like I watched that one the least because it's so like imprinted in my mind, like just the experience of that. So yeah, 5-star or 5 skulls all the way. So
and what you just said there, this could really, as a kid, we look at The Exorcist as fiction. We look at, that's all fiction to us. But this is an old lady that's just killing people.
Yeah.
My grandma's giving me cookies. This grandma's killing people. Yeah, shit happens. So guys, the credits are about to roll. The curtain's about to drop. We're at the end of the third act. Before it does, as I said before, all the links for these gentlemen and the podcast is down in the description. I can't recommend it enough. Not only do I listen, but I was a guest on there with my beautiful wife, Ashley, and we had an amazing time talking about child's play and other things that shall not be described. And I'm not going to talk about it here either, because I don't know if you guys have revealed it yet, but make sure if you don't listen to it for anything else, try to figure out what movie they're talking about. And if you DM me the right answer on what movie these guys have been talking about, you will win a Sledgehammer horror toy. If you can figure it out, you can DM me.
I thought it was like, and you'll win the movie's Blu-ray.
I wouldn't buy that. You guys can figure it out. The first person,
I did.
That's serious. The first person to DM me wins a Sledgehammer horror.
Oh, that's awesome. Toy. That's really cool.
Yeah. So that's the confidence I have in this. So and that's how much I love it. Listening to you guys talk about it cracks me the hell up. So
what the movie in particular?
What's that?
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you so bad. My apologies. The movie in particular.
I love
it. The movie in particular that shall not be named. We're not talking. Is that what you mean? Yeah.
Yep.
Real quick, I started doing conventions again, and I'm hitting them really hard this month. So it's like 4 in a row, back to back to back to back. And I haven't told Brian this yet, but I've had numerous people come up to me, at least 3, and ask me what the movie is. And I was like, I'm not telling you that. I am not telling you that. So secret is safe with me, Brian. I'm holding strong.
Oh, thank God. Yeah, I don't have my leaping powers on this one. So
I'm giving something away. So
something's at stake here. So yeah.
I ain't telling nobody. But you guys can figure it out. Like I said, honest to God, the first person to DM me either on Twitter or Instagram, you will win. I'll pay for shipping and everything. That's the confidence I have. That's how much I love these guys and their podcast. So, gentlemen, don't go anywhere. I got a couple more questions for you. Until next time, guys, as always, keep talking horror, stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.